Hello everyone, and thank you for stopping by, and welcome to the Wasabi Aquarium channel. In this video, I will show you various methods of trimming willow moss. This tutorial is applicable to other mosses such as South American, weeping, and flame moss. I will cover the fundamentals of moss trimming in this video. It's recommended that you watch the entire video from here. A planted aquarium is all about the best water conditions and beautiful design. Trimming is a very important task as it helps with maintaining appearance and aid with growth. We've received a number of questions about trimming moss. For example, I don't know where to cut moss, or how close or where do I trim moss, or moss bits are scattered everywhere in the aquarium that's propagated. What should I do? This can cause a terrible headache in terms of maintenance and appearance. Issues such as these typically result in a moss eyesore. There were many concerns as such, so this time we'll talk about the proper methods of moss maintenance. We'll use this as an example. There are two moss trimming methods. Self-explanatory. The first method is using your hands. The second method is with scissors, each of which have its own advantages and disadvantages. Let's start off with the hands method first. The first step is to assess if it's pluckable from the driftwood, like so. So let's experiment with this blob first. This method is great for beginners, as it can easily be pulled. You don't have to have any special tools, just look at a few random strands and pull it in a firm direction, like this. Beware. Pulling in the opposite direction will result in the entire blob being pulled off. Just like so, if you decide to pull upwards, you might also pull the entire blob off as well. I recommend that you pull the outermost tips of the moss and pull it into its natural flowing direction, like this. As I just explained, the merit of this method is rather easy and requires no tools. You can easily and carefully pluck away with no difficulty and minimize random fragments being scattered all around. It may scatter a little, but it's definitely a lot less compared to the scissors method. As it's not trimmed, you can visually see and remove moss floaties. Oh look, I can see a few bits floating away. I'll grab them now. The disadvantage is that you might get carried away and pluck away way too much. I recommend that you master this method first before you commence trimming. It's important that you pluck from various locations of the moss blob, like so. If you pull too much away, the blob will detach from the hardscape entirely. Please keep this in mind. This blob of willow moss is pretty attached to the driftwood, so it's safe to pluck. But not all mosses are the same. South American moss, for example, don't attach as well, so if you pluck it by hand, the entire blob will detach. I recommend that you test pull a few moss strands prior to plucking. If this moves the entire moss blob, then I recommend the scissors method. Let's carry on over to the scissors method. It's best to plan where to trim first, so I'll show you now. I think trimming about here is okay. As you can see, the moss floaties is terrible. Scattered all over the place, right? And this is only trimming a small portion of the moss. This is a clear disadvantage to plucking. However, trimming will give you detail and precision to your scape. I think the result will be a beautiful finish because you can do a contour trim. So it's definitely an advantage to your overall aquascape's appearance. So, if you want a beautiful finish, go with the scissors. It's scattering like so, but I'll ignore it for now. In order to minimize the scattering as much as possible, I recommend you turn off all your filter and skimmer. The water flow will cause newly trimmed moss bits to scatter in random places, so please keep this in mind. After trimming, you can easily use the aquarium net to catch out stray moss bits. It's okay to cut the moss short like this. I'll leave some patches long and trim the rest. Rest assured, you can follow this method safely at home. That way, you are ensuring your moss will thrive for years to come. It's best to ensure the moss blobs are attached evenly and neatly to the driftwood. Trimming will result in a beautiful moss blob. There are other dense plants such as dwarf hairgrass, so if the blob gets too dense, the bottom layers will die and melt away. Similar to this patch here, so it's important to time when to trim. The lower strands are dead, so if you leave it like so, you risk the entire blob melting away. Yep, this is bad, but this is entirely preventable. I think it's best to trim it like so if melting does occur. This is fixable, but in this case I can't simply remove the driftwood and reattach the moss. It's an easy fix if the moss melted on a piece of small hardscape, but difficult when it's on a large piece of hardscape like so. You can technically reapply the moss with string, but a bit difficult in this scenario without ample space. Anyways, going back to trimming with scissors. If you don't like scattered moss debris, I recommend trimming with a siphoning hose. It's a good idea to use a large gauge hose like this, as a thin gauge hose will clog real fast. It's great to siphon out as you trim, so let's try it out. Hold one end in the tank and start the siphon on the other. Let's start trimming this bit. As you can see, the scattered bits will be siphoned out on the fly. It's a bit tricky as you'll need some good multitasking skills using both hands, but if you're siphoning as you trim, you've prevented moss floaties entirely. You won't have a headache later cleaning moss bits being propagated at random spots in your tank. I highly recommend that you use scissors and a siphoning hose while trimming things like moss. Depending on the hose flow rates, your water levels will decrease, so a good time to also do your water change. So I highly recommend that you trim moss at the same time you do a water change. Willow moss grows terribly fast. The majority of mosses propagate relatively quick. It will propagate if you leave the moss floating around, compared to slow-growing South American moss. If this is a concern, it's best to stick to slow-growing moss. I've thoroughly explained how to trim willow moss this time around. You'll have a headache if you don't trim the moss appropriately. This includes moss attached to driftwood and stone and other hardscape. As discussed, if moss grows out of control, the inner layers will drown out and might melt the entire blob. It's best to keep moss nice and neat so it won't look weird in your aquascape. Untrimmed moss will negatively impact your tank's overall image. If the moss isn't your thing, you may consider removing it entirely. I experienced this firsthand, but I kept trying and ensured the moss was firmly attached to the hardscape. In general, I think it's best to keep trying with these methods if you like the appearance of moss. Moss is a very good filler in empty spaces. It's a good idea to tie moss and disguise empty areas. I don't think it's possible to have the perfect bit of hardscape that looks perfect on all angles. For example, in the case of driftwood, you may find flat spots or imperfections. These are perfect spots to cover with moss and give it a more natural look. I think you'd agree that moss is a great tool to cover imperfections. So, imperfections or not, moss definitely adds a natural dimension. Your aquascape success is all about using all the tricks of the trade. I think that moss is important in nature aquariums, so please keep these trimming tips in mind. So, there you have it. I hope that you can now manage and maintain moss in the best possible way. For more information, please see the description box below. There, you'll see a link to a more detailed article. I'll also summarize all the equipment in the description box below, so please scroll down and have a read after this video. This video is purely about trimming moss. However, are you looking to grow moss, or are you looking to troubleshooting moss issues? You're in luck. Make sure you check out the other videos linked in the description box below. If you have any questions, or you'd like us to explain anything, feel free to submit your comment below. Unfortunately, I don't have time to reply to them all. If I see trending questions, I will collate and answer them in future videos. If you find this video useful, I'll gladly appreciate if you like, share, and subscribe to the Wasabi Aquarium channel. So, I'll end the video here. Thank you for watching.